Welcome to another installment of Retrace in History. This time around, we are visiting Fort Frederick State Park here in Maryland. This fort was built during the French and Indian War and actually served for three conflicts in American history. Let's go check it out. To understand why Fort Frederick came into existence, one must understand the turmoil in North America in the mid-18th century. Disputes between the empires of Britain and France over lands west of the Appalachian Mountains had sparked a global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. The North American portion is known today as the French and Indian War. Following the destruction of the British Army commanded by General Edward Braddock near present-day Pittsburgh on July 9, 1755, France and their Amerindian allies had the initiative. The French fortifications along the Allegheny and Ohio rivers supplied warriors with the necessary provisions to cross the mountains and raid the British frontier, instilling terror amongst the civilian population with the hopes of demoralizing and support for the war. In response to these raids that started in the summer of 1755, the colonies relied on what few regular soldiers were present, had to raise militias, and established fortifications to protect their western borders. Now, if you've seen our video on Pennsylvania's Fort Loudoun, you'll remember that Pennsylvania built a chain of wooden stockades but struggled to garrison them. In fact, stories spread throughout the colonies about native warriors burning the stockades without even having to assault them. This played directly into the design of Maryland's own defense against these raids. In 1756, Governor Horatio Sharp succeeded in convincing the Maryland legislature to approve funds needed to construct a fort. In June of that year, the building of a fort commenced near present-day Big Pool, Maryland. To ensure the money of Maryland taxpayers would not literally go up in flames, Sharp had the fort constructed out of stone. While a common practice in Europe, the resources needed to quarry enough stone for fort construction meant wood was the preferred material. Fort Frederick would be one of, if not the only British fort established in North America constructed out of stone. The walls would come to stand at a staggering 18 feet high. So we're standing in one of the four bastions of the fort. What remains is the stone wall, but if we were here in 1756, 57, 58, we'd be standing in a dirt wall right now because there was a dirt fill that went almost to the crest of the top of the wall. Wouldn't have gone the whole way, but almost nearly to the top. And that would have been a platform for the artillery places, and that would have been all four bastions. This fort was located here because it has a commanding view over a bend in the Potomac River, and that prevented any French and native forces from coming down the Potomac and threatening the rest of the colony of Maryland. If you look closely at the walls, it might be hard with the dark skies we have today. You'll see it's brighter on the lower half and the upper crust is darker, and there's a reason for that. The brighter portion, that is the original wall from 1756. Now, over years, the walls started to crumble. This was a farm at one point, and I'll get more into that in the video. But in 1934, the CCC came in and restored the fort, at least the walls, and using similar quarried stone as the original fort was built with, they put the upper portion back, and that's the darker stone. Very cool. So you can see the original stone and the reconstructed stone. Governor Sharp wished for the fort's peak strength to be nearly 400 men. This would include a small contingent of regular soldiers from the 60th Foot, the Royal Americans, as well as Maryland militia. To accommodate, two massive barracks were erected on opposite sides of the parade ground, each sleeping 100 men comfortably, but could hold twice the amount if necessary. It's believed that there was even accommodation for the laundresses of the garrison in a partitioned corner of one of the barracks, something I've never encountered while visiting French and Indian War sites. So we're currently inside a room depicting the king's stores. Now, the storehouses appear to have been primarily put in the governor's mansion, which is no longer standing. There are foundational remains. They're currently looking to find the plans of what that mansion would have looked like. The building would have consisted of the officers' quarters, storage, primarily for officer storage, but also the king's stores, which includes the soldiers' miscellaneous items. You can see behind me, essential items, essential miscellaneous items to survive on the frontier, and also the gunpowder. That all would have been in that mansion. But they've recreated those rooms or a likeness of them in the one barracks here, and that's where we're in right now.
Yeah, I love that apparently the soldiers here, or the officers, attempted to get the colony to pay for their own cooks, but the Maryland Assembly said, no, you can cook your own damn food. Yeah. That's what you have Batman for.
Indeed, one of the biggest difficulties for the British Empire during the French and Indian War was its relations with the colonies. Benjamin Franklin, when dealing with Edward Braddock back in 1755, advised the general to ask, not order, the colonies. It was expected the colonists would show unwavering support in money and manpower, but the colonial legislatures regularly objected. It was a war involving the mother country, therefore shouldn't London be financing everything? This debate over who was to finance the war left garrisons like Fort Frederick plagued with shortages of troops, supplies, and the funds necessary to complete the fortification. The lack of soldiers to defend the frontier became so bad that in 1758, the British government had to bend the knee and outfitted 400 men, complete with the iconic British redcoat. These Royal Marylanders were divided between garrisons at Fort Frederick and Fort Cumberland, with the rest going off to assist General John Forbes in capturing Fort Duquesne, the French outpost that is at modern-day Pittsburgh. Now, this room depicts the hospitals at Fort Frederick. Now, something to keep in mind, any fortification in the mid-18th century would have kept their hospitals outside the fort walls, typically at least, typically. The reason being, you don't want all the sick around all the healthy, because funny thing, that will lead to more people getting sick. Contagious diseases will spread. So that would have been outside the fort. However, in 1757, shortly after the fort went into operation, there was an outbreak of an unknown ailment. And now this is not smallpox, as they do record smallpox happening the year later, but an unknown ailment. Well, that's horrifying.
So I forget the library that could come out because, like on gentlemen's magazines, I have, for instance, don't just discuss French and Indian War, they also discuss the Court of 7 Years' War, so it would fit there.
Following the Forbes campaign of 1758, the threat of raids on the Maryland frontier appeared to be subsided. The Maryland Assembly ceased future funding of Fort Frederick, although militia was authorized to guard it during Pontiac's War in 1763. The fort was essentially abandoned by the end of the 1760s. But here is where Fort Frederick's history becomes storied. So, following the French and Indian War, the fort kind of sat in neglect till about the time of the American Revolution, and this was used to house prisoners of war that the American Army had captured. So British POWs were housed in this perimeter. Now, I'm unsure if the barracks were standing by this point. I have a feeling that they would have likely have fallen apart or been torn down by that point. But this fort, when it was first built, was supposed to garrison 200 men comfortably, 400 men if you had to in a pinch. They put anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 prisoners of war in the perimeter. They're not a lot of room. Not a lot of room. They would have been in very simple huts made out of bark if they were lucky. Likely they would have been out in the open with hardly anything to protect themselves with. Remember, we're talking about the Continental Army. We're talking about the United States of America in the 1770s. We do not have a lot of supplies. These men had it rough. Amongst the more notable ranks and prisoners were the soldiers from the 2nd Battalion, Fraser's Highlanders. These were men that had surrendered at Yorktown in 1781. Upon the end of the American Revolution, the fort returned to a state of abandonment. The state of Maryland would sell the property sometime around the turn of the 19th century. In 1860, the land was purchased by Nathan Williams, the son of a former slave in the area. Mr. Williams grew up on a farm just 4 miles from the ruins of Fort Frederick. In 1847, he succeeded in buying an enslaved woman named Amy. In 1860, the couple and their growing family moved to the site of Fort Frederick after purchasing the land for farming. The Williams did not get to enjoy the peace of the Potomac River for long, for they found their farm being on the front lines of the American Civil War. In late 1861, the 1st Maryland Infantry of the Union Army occupied the ruined fortifications to prevent Confederate raiders from crossing the river below. The officers lived in the Williams house while the men camped in the old fort. On Christmas Day, 1861, a minor skirmish involving the 1st Maryland occurred just a short distance from the fort, to which it would receive a battle honor on the regimental flag. Think about that. A fort 100 years old was still in service at this time. Not something you hear about in American military history. After the war, Mr. Williams quickly improved his farm to make back losses from the conflict. This included a barn upon the former Northwest Bastion and using the remaining stone walls as one large pig pen, as well as establishing an orchard and a garden. Now that is the proper way to fortify against deer from destroying your produce. With the turn of the 20th century, the fort appeared no greater than a peculiar rubble of stone. The fact that elements of these walls remain standing for 150 years without preservation is astounding to me and attracted the interest of the people of Maryland. In 1922, the state purchased the land and announced the establishment of Fort Frederick State Park. It wasn't until the Great Depression and the creation of the Civilian Conservation Corps that preservation efforts truly got underway. The CCC reconstructed the walls to their original appearance and established the necessary infrastructure for the public to visit the historic grounds. Later preservation efforts led to the reconstruction of the 2 barracks and a visitor center. Today, Fort Frederick State Park is one of the most acclaimed museum forts to visit in the United States due to its history spanning 3 major conflicts. It also is host to an annual 18th century market where reproduced wares and utensils of the period are sold over a 4-day weekend. Though we had the misfortune of visiting the market on a rainy Sunday, the vendors remain in high spirits. If you only get the chance to see Fort Frederick once, plan to visit during the market. If you can't, be sure to check out the State Park's website and see what events they have on their calendar. So, we got rained out. It's become a tradition on Retracing History to wherever we go,
It rains.
It rains. It doesn't just rain, it pours.
Yep.
And then we feel wet and sad and cold and likely to contract pneumonia. Yet to happen so far, several weeks into Retracing History, yet to happen.
Yep.
Thank you guys for watching this Retracing History as we go through the grounds of Fort Frederick. I'm hoping to come back in the future on a drier day. Maybe we'll come when they do a latter living history event. We can really talk with some of the historians on site. Thank you for watching. Be sure to hit the like button to let YouTube know history videos do matter, or do whatever Rumble does. What's a Rumble? What's a like on Rumble? I don't know the difference. Also, be sure to subscribe to Readout Productions on YouTube and on Rumble. And if you want to go the extra mile supporting me, you can buy me a cup of cappuccino through Ko-fi. Link is in the description below. I'm going to need it because I am cold. And also be sure to subscribe to A Humble Collector for surviving this journey.
I am still alive as of recording.
As of recording, this might be our last transmission.
Indeed.
Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next video.